Good Holy Sunday morning, dear Lara, and to all of our friends in the United States. Lara, I want to greet you in the love of our God. Today, again, we are recording the second show because we did not know what were the plans of our dear President Donald Trump. When we recorded last week, he had given a period of time for 2 weeks, and somehow, whether or not he was going to attack the nuclear sites in Iran, or he's going to still wait for Iran to make a move. And eventually, the same night after we recorded our first show, you and me, and you were right on spot. As a matter of fact, nobody knew the plans of the president, except that he definitely, it seems that he obliterated all the nuclear capabilities of Iran. He did not change the regime as you had predicted on our first show that we recorded. And now we are post the bombing of the nuclear bomb. And we see that there is a controversy in the United States between the public media and between the US government. And there is some sort of a leak that went out. So we live in an atmosphere that is very complicated. It seems that life is being attacked. The human mind is being attacked. And I know you're working on some sort of mind-boggling issue that makes it China or allows it China to manipulate even the human intelligence or put in limitation to the human intelligence, to the human brain of the human being, the way God created it. Lara, good morning to you. What is happening recently in the world after the bombing of the nuclear sites in Iran?
Good morning, Father. Well, one thing I want to point out is that you said obliterated all of Iran's nuclear capability. The president and the administration, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, they're not saying that they have obliterated all of Iran's capability. There's been an ongoing dispute over how much damage was caused. I have spoken to people who've been, let's say, on the inside. I can't say too much because I don't want to give too much away. But I will tell you, this is, as far as I've been able to ascertain, this is where we stand in terms of damage. So the bombs that were used on a facility like the Fordo facility, which has underground, which is built, deep underground, these bombs, these weapon systems have a far greater capacity than is known and reported. I mean, that's what you would expect, right? You wouldn't want to give up to your enemies exactly what it is that you're capable of doing. But they are precise, and they have the assessments from the ground in Iran, from the Iranian regime, from the Israelis, who have obviously a vast intelligence network in the region, and from the United States, from aerial surveillance and other surveillance tools that the United States has. The assessment are that Iran's centrifuges, the areas within these facilities that are critical to the production, to enrich uranium and to the production of nuclear weapons, were decimated, and that it would be both unsafe and extremely difficult to rebuild that capability. That doesn't mean it's impossible. What is less clear is exactly how much enriched uranium the Iranians were able to move before the strikes. Now, one of the reasons that the president was probably talking about 2 weeks to decide is because you're not going to lay all your cards on the table and tell them that you're coming, right? So he said 2 weeks, and then he bombed, within hours. So part of that motivation would be because that they're going to move the enriched uranium and other things that they need out of your reach and hide it. So you want maximum impact. You're not going to, tell the enemy exactly what you're doing, when and where, and how you're doing it. So that's one part of it. I mean, I know there's a lot of skepticism out there. There's people are like, well, there's this leaked report. And so look, there's all the people who are like, against Trump and against the strikes and against Israel and so on, that are leaping into it, and against war. It's a lot of people who are afraid of being dragged into another war, who are saying, look, it didn't even work, which is quite, it's quite interesting to me, because the tactic that was used was to create a preliminary intelligence report that is at odds with all the other reporting, both internally and externally, that doesn't quite say what they say it says, because it says the preliminary assessment is that this may not have been, what people thought, but then you leak it. Now, what does that remind you of? It should remind everybody of Benghazi. when the United States Ambassador Chris Stevens was murdered at the Special Mission Compound in Benghazi, Libya. Because what did they do? They created an intelligence assessment. An analyst wrote up, a lone analyst wrote up a report that was then leaked that said that the attack was related to this film that was, not appreciated, that was offensive in much of the Islamic world. Well, that was nonsense. It flew in the face of all the other evidence, including what Chris Stevens himself said before he was murdered, when he called from inside the building where he was under attack, under a terrorist attack, according to him. And so what you have is the same system where they created an intelligence product that is at odds with all the evidence. That is, they get away with it by saying it's a preliminary assessment, so they hedge their bets, and then somebody leaks it, and then the media picks it up. They present it not quite as it is, and this is then, perpetuated by political operatives and by bots. And of course, some of those, a lot of them apparently, are operating on both sides of the aisle. And so you have the president under attack from within, and then his people on the defensive, going out there trying to prove what it is that they know. So it's fascinating because you see the same tactics, and it's not hard to recognize them after a while. And what's frustrating for, I think, millions of Americans, I talk to people every day, and they always ask the same question: where's the accountability? Because the same people that are behind this kind of misinformation, disinformation campaign are the ones who are behind Hunter Biden's laptop, saying that that was a product of Russia, the ones who said that President Trump was a Russian spy, his handler was Vladimir Putin, the 2016 election was stolen by Russia for President Trump, that the 2020 election fraud wasn't real, it didn't happen. I mean, this is all the same people that are pushing these disinformation campaigns. And so it's frustrating, but on the one hand, it's really frustrating because you don't even understand why we're still having this conversation at this point. Why are these people still able to participate in what is an overt, seditious conspiracy to subvert and undermine a legally, lawfully, popularly elected president of the United States of America, whose task is to carry out the will of the American people? You see him being subverted, you see this conspiracy, and you never see anybody being held to account.
And to make a peace in the world, right, Lara? Because I do recall that the president, when he was on his campaign, he said, I want to be known as a peacemaker and a unifier. Who's standing against him in the United States? We're still going to play the radio show that we recorded, you and me, this Sunday. And we're going to play this podcast before that so people can go back in time and see how much truth you had predicted. As a matter of fact, it seems like you knew the mind a little bit of the president, and somehow that he is a peacemaker, and he's not, but this is not going to be like out of proportion war of some sort. But it's so fantastic to see that from the bombing of the nuclear sites in Iran, and let's say dismantling them a little bit or delaying them for years backward, and it's going to be very hard, even though not impossible, to probably work on their capabilities again. He goes all of a sudden for 12 hours, a ceasefire will be between, and was, as a matter of fact, between Iran and Israel. And he's inviting both people to the table. Then he goes to NATO, and he comes back here where they all up to 5% their contribution. But then there's something that happens between NATO and Russia, and another disturbance, as a matter of fact, between Russia and Ukraine. It's almost like counterproductive. It feels, and I'm not comparing by any means. Sure. But when Jesus used to preach the gospel, when St. Paul and Barnabas, when St. Peter used to go to preach the gospel, and today on Sunday we are celebrating the feast days of Saints Peter and Paul, there was always some troublemakers who would go after them, and they saw confusion. They plant seeds of disinformation as and disinformation. Who's the worst enemy for the policies that the president keeps promoting for peace and for unity within the gate? And I want to again insist on you to tell me a little bit about the difference between Iran and what we spoke about the last time, Ukraine, Iran and Ukraine.
Okay. So this is one thing that's important just for me to make sure is distinct, right? I don't know the president's mind, and I would never presume to know his mind. In fact, when I see people on TV saying that they know what the president thinks and how he feels, it offends me because I know it's not true, because they're not in a position to know. But what we can know, what I am basing my analysis on, is his actions, right? He has been consistently anti-war. He wanted to and did get out of the Syrian war. He wanted to get out of the Afghan war, and I never got a chance to do that properly, but he was making moves to get out of Afghanistan. And he's been consistent in this policy over time, right? He's stated this consistently. So to me, the idea that you look at someone who's been consistent for 10, 20, even more years, and now you're suddenly going to look at them, and in an instant, you're going to say, okay, no, they're not who they say they are, and I don't believe them anymore. That's troubling to me, because I do pay a lot of attention to what people say, especially when they're talking about themselves. And so what I would say is, the United States has a very clear policy decision that the U.S. does not want Iran to have nuclear weapons. Now, you can argue about that. You can say, if I was Iranian, I would want those weapons and so on, and all of that is true. But the fixed position of the United States, for the most part, except for under Obama. I mean, Obama said it, but he gave them hundreds of millions of dollars and made it easier for them to get a weapon, not harder. So that's a question mark over there. But over time, over successive administrations, the U.S.'s official policy hasn't really changed. And so what the Trump administration, President Trump himself and his Secretary of Defense and others have stated repeatedly is that the purpose of these strikes was to prevent a war and not engage in one. Now, there's always a risk in that strategy that you kick off a wider war. But I would urge people, I think probably one of the most important things that you can do for yourself when you're trying to understand the truth here is to not look at anything in isolation. Sometimes it can be overwhelming because we like things to be simple. We take things off in little bites and we can deal with that. But this strategy, these strikes are happening in an environment that you touched on, right? Because you talked about the president going over to NATO and so on. So how are these things connected? Well, this is absolutely critical because, for example, part of this strategy are the tariffs. So what has President Trump been doing with the tariffs? Well, with America's allies, he's been creating more favorable kind of terms. But with America's enemies, he's been taking away their money. And one of America's recognized adversaries is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran. And I'll put to you the way an intelligence operative or source, if you like, put this to me. Someone with a long history in intelligence and also in economic warfare said to me just a short time ago that the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran works for the IRGC. People think it's the other way around, but the IRGC is really running Iran. And where does a lot of their power come from? It comes from the fact that they're a global conglomerate, right? And it comes from the fact that they run drugs and trafficking in weapons and human beings and all kinds of other things worldwide. Sanctioned oil, for example, that's a big one. And so what the United States has been doing, one with the tariffs, right? But also with other forms of economic warfare. Look at what the Israeli media reported. They reported that with the strikes, Israel bombed not only nuclear targets, but economic targets, and that they gathered the economic data on the IRGC's economic financial enterprise globally. So that's
in America will be surprised to find out that this group in Iran is connected to the blood diamond in Africa, to the human trafficking,
correct.
pornography, child trafficking, a huge
That's
cartel
right.
of drugs, South America, as a matter of fact, Latin America and Mexico coming through our borders where I had the privilege that you took me for months and we saw the bracelets, how unfortunately even Christian organizations, including Catholic charities, whether they knew or they did not know, they became somehow complicit under the Obama administration, the Biden administration, especially in the Biden time, and the first administration of our president. He was trying to stop them, and we would see how these children will come with the bracelets, the contraceptive, the Peptagon. Do you think our American people realize the magnitude of there is like a worldwide chain for the Iranian regime that is
No,
a good one?
they don't, because we don't have a real press corps anymore. The people whose job and responsibility it is to figure these things out, to investigate them, to find out and to share important information, important relevant information that gives you a real understanding. I mean, one of the most basic fundamental questions is, who really runs the country? Now, that applied to the United States under Joe Biden. We find out with the order pen, it wasn't really Joe Biden. The same thing applies to Iran. Is it really the Ayatollah Khomeini? Is it the regime? Is it the mullahs behind him? Or who is the real power in Iran? And the real power is the IRGC. And they have, you're exactly right, whether it's trafficking or blood diamonds in Africa, they have this massive global reach, right, where all the money and power comes from. So Donald Trump's strategy with Israel as an ally, whether you like it or not, it's a strategic ally, and they've been working together to box the IRGC in. So what have they done? Well, Israel has decimated Hamas. Israel has also decimated Hezbollah in Lebanon. You don't hear a lot. There's Lebanese people. There's a few crying about that, but there's a lot of people in Lebanon, as you know, Father, celebrating that.
And they're still afraid. Remember, today I was going to call you to tell you Lebanese people are still afraid about the ballistic weapons who are still, they're working on, it seems. It's not like they're not neutralized yet. I mean, the Lebanese people are really.
That's right. They are afraid. And so Iran has all these terrorist proxies, and the IRGC is a massive global criminal enterprise that has its hands in just about every dirty business that you can imagine around the world. And they use that to finance and spread terrorism as part of their agenda, politically and globally, which includes obtaining a nuclear weapon and wiping Israel off the face of the earth and death to America, as they've been saying every year, since 1979. So if what the United States is doing, what Donald Trump is doing, is he's applying a strategy of maximum pressure. So what did he do with the tariffs? Well, he got NATO. He pushed NATO into agreeing to do something that they haven't wanted to do and haven't agreed to do for a very long time. In fact, since the foundation of NATO, which is to spend 5% of their GDP on defense. So the United States has been footing the bill, carrying that burden on its own. And he said, we're not going to do that anymore. And you're going to do this. So he used tariffs as one of the weapons and that gave him more power in the negotiations at NATO. He's also using that to, along with Israel, to weaken the IRGC globally and really set because the Iranian people, if their regime is not under pressure, they will never be able to overcome the Iranian regime on their own. They've been trying for decades, and they get massacred every time they rise up.
I have to ask you this. So why would Israel attack their own prime minister, which we know for 20 years, every time they try to bring Netanyahu through their court system to put him in jail? And President Trump calls for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's trial on Monday to be canceled. And that would be, next month, basically, immediately after our show. Why is Israel counterproductive against itself, just like in the United States? What's happening? And I know there's a lot of crimes, unfortunately, in Gaza. Really, Lara, I have to tell you, Christians are exposed dangerously. Look at the bombing of St. Elias in Damascus this past Sunday, where 50 Christians were killed. Families were literally, this time the word
terrible. It was terrible.
It's terrible. I mean, look.
And look at Nigeria, the massacre of over 200 people in a village. Yeah.
Right. Nobody spoke about it. Look in Congo. Look at the case of Armenia, as a matter of fact. And unfortunately, Israel, in its response, there are massacres, there are civilian casualties that are on a large scale and level. But you're saying, despite all of this, the strategic alliance between President Trump and Netanyahu is still to install a peace in the Middle East and eventually in the world, and to remove nuclear capabilities, to stop anti-Semitism, probably, to create a new Middle East where Muslims, Christians, and Jews would come and live together and grow economically together, to reopen the Silk Road from the east all the way probably to Israel, passing throughout the entire Sunni world. So despite all of this, do you still think that this alliance is still valid?
Yes. I mean, this is a very significant strategic alliance. This is much more than, for example, Ukraine, right? The U.S. is not relying on Ukraine in that region to do what Israel does for the United States. And also, Father, the original premise of your question, which was why would Israel go after their own Prime Minister
Netanyahu.
Netanyahu? Well, why would the United States go after President Trump? I mean, every time you turn around, they're screaming impeach, impeach, impeach. Last time they impeached him multiple times, and even after he was out of office, they still impeached him. I mean, so the answer, I would say, now is obvious. It's the same. Israel has the same problem that the United States has, is they have people within Israel who are working to undermine their own interests, because these are people who believe in global institutions. These are people who offer up global solutions. They want you to believe that every problem is global, and they've used technology to make every problem appear to be global. So they say, oh, climate here is the same as climate there, and there's only one solution, and it's global. Well, they did that with the virus. They said, look, we have a problem with the virus. It's everywhere, and we have to all do the same thing, except every doctor and anyone who's ever worked, every virologist, everyone in the medical field, whoever deals with viruses, knows that viruses never replicate identically in hot and cold climates. They're completely different environments. So how did we end up with a virus that was replicating at the same speed in hot and cold climates at the same time? That's called manipulation. That's when you know you're being manipulated. It is outside of the norm. So, my best answer for you as to who exactly is doing this, I can't give you names of this person in Israel and that person in Israel, but I can tell you that it's very obvious. These are the same forces. Right? These are the people that are profoundly anti-human in their agenda. They're anti-nation states and sovereignty. Why? Because individual sovereignty is a problem for them, just like national sovereignty. It gets in the way. They want the same old thing that a lot of people have wanted over time, which is power. They want to control the world, and they want to control how we think, how we act. Look how poorly they react if you question something. Look how poorly they react if you don't agree. We reward people for surrender. And ultimately, if you step back from all of that, as you know, Father, you've talked about this a lot. This is a spiritual battle between good and evil. There's good in Israel and there's evil in Israel. And it's the same in the United States and it's the same in Iran. By the overwhelming majority of American voters. And they have asked him, they've said, we recognize the rise of evil in the world. We recognize that we have been dragged into endless wars. We don't want this anymore. And it must have been a difficult decision for him to make, that in order to have peace through strength, you have to define what strength is. You have to show strength. And that opened the door for him to be criticized and say, well, you said you were the anti-war president, now you're going to war. But as you pointed out, the purpose of this was to avoid a bigger war. Now, some people will say, well, then why then has Israel got nuclear weapons? Why can the U.S. have nuclear weapons and Iran can't? Well, they just can't, because that's how it works right now.
Our friends on KNUS leave us in less than probably 50 seconds. I have to bring up the spiritual role of the Vatican. Pope Leo is United States citizen. He's from Chicago. And I'm sure you're sensing his statements in regard to the Middle East, in regard to supporting persecuted Christians and the situation between Iran and Israel. Do you think he's getting what President Trump is doing? And if he is he reflecting that to
It doesn't appear so. He's certainly not reflecting it. Now, I can't speak to what he gets and what he doesn't, but if his statements and his actions are anything to go by, then he's no different to the last pope, in the sense that he is not fighting for Christians. He has been silent on the genocide of Christians in Nigeria and in the former Democratic Republic of Congo and in other parts of the world. I don't see the Vatican intervening on behalf of Christians anywhere.
Well, I want to thank you, Lara, for our listeners on KNUS. I'm sure if they go to the Vatican site, you will see actually the Pope is making statements, holding meetings regarding the Nigerian massacre that took place probably now, and the church in St. Elias in Damascus. He showed a lot of support during his Sunday homily. My friends, we want to pray that the Holy Father will have, first of all, access to information, and that something will happen between him and President Trump, that they can talk, they can speak, because as you will tell in the next 5 minutes, And unfortunately, you're going to leave us now, but we would encourage you, go to our podcast and download the podcast. Look at Mission of Hope and Mercy on YouTube. And I'm sure it'll be on the X page of Lara Logan as well, and Mission of Hope and Mercy on X. And you can listen to the full podcast. I want to wish you for now a wonderful and blessed Sunday and a happy feast day of Saints Peter and Paul to all of us. And please be safe. Lara, we continue with you. I want a little bit develop this because the church teaches us to be compassionate. But it seems that the church after World War II and the chapter of Pope Pius XII, in his stand from the Jewish, it seems there's Lara, there's two stories about Pope Pius. Was really Pope Pius supportive of the Jewish people? Did he really save a lot of Jewish people in Rome and in Germany? Or was he kind of like in between, and then he still kept connection with the Nazi regime and with Adolf Hitler? And after Vatican II, it seems that the church moved in a different direction in regard to expressions, even like they don't use anymore martyrs of faith. They use victims. They don't speak about, religious massacres. They speak about acts of violence that reach to all people, basically, and somehow. This change of language, does it help necessarily?
No, it makes it worse. They don't talk about crimes against children, Father.
Correct.
And there is no greater crime than a crime against a child. It's unforgivable. I mean, well, I suppose everything is forgivable and it's not for us to decide. But what I mean by that is just when you carry out crimes of great evil against children, what you need from the Vatican is much more than they've given. What you need from the Pope is much more than he's giving. Mentioning it in his homily, yes, this is important, but you had children, you had women and children in Nigeria who were locked in cages in the market and burned alive.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Because they were Christian.
Yes.
For no other reason but that they were Christian. So why is the Pope not in Nigeria? Why was he not on a plane and heading right to that village and going and showing solidarity for the Christians who, by the way, have been massacred since 9/11? The very same day that the Islamic group Al-Qaeda flew planes into the World Trade Center in the United States of America, hours before, on that exact same day, they invaded the first Christian village in northern Nigeria, set up a watchtower, a command and control center, and for the next 20 plus years, they have been systematically erasing Christians from that land over and over and over again. Over 100,000 Christians have died. So this should not be, yes, the Pope is new, but this is not new for the Vatican. This is not a new issue for the Catholic Church or for any church across the world. This has been going on for more than 20 years. It is very simple. Unarmed Christian villages, for the most part, because when they pick up weapons in Nigeria, they get punished as vigilantes and they have action taken against them. So there's very, very few that are able to defend themselves.
And
For the
more
most
than
part,
anyone
it's
else,
women and children.
Sorry, and more than anyone else, when we at the Mission of Hope and Mercy decided, and you helped me a lot for years to make my point, whether in the administration or in the church or to the people in the U.S., look how much under attack we have been because we tried to assist the persecuted Christians as a Mission of Hope and Mercy. So I understand this is difficult. You have 3.5 minutes, or honestly, to speak about James O'Keefe starting his new podcast, My Price is My Life. And he chose you today, exactly today, that you will be the first one about the risk when we tell the truth. Lara, you're a great journalist, you're a great mother, you're a great partner, you're a great, honestly, you're a great spiritual lady. By all means, when I look at your Wikipedia, first of all, they still define you as a South African journalist and you're American. I wonder why.
Why do you look at Wikipedia? Would you
I
go?
don't know.
Would you
It's
go to
like,
the Nazis' diaries and look up what they said? Because it's might as well be the same thing.
well, you corresponded on Afghanistan and Iraq. You corresponded on other media organizations, criticisms, and you reported from Egypt. You suffered personally there. You corresponded and commented on Afghanistan and Libya, Benghazi, You had your fight with the mainstream media. You were the prophet in between them, trying to really educate them on the truth of true critical and investigative journalism. You were on Fox News. You have Lara Awards. You fought. You stood up. You didn't fight with anybody against Antifa and what they're doing. AIDS and COVID-19, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You commented about the Rothschild family and the Darwin. And in your personal life, you are such a successful human being. Your husband and your children love you so much. So do your dogs and your friends. And
My
how
dogs definitely love me.
how
And
how
my
were
cats,
and your cast? How were you able to conduct all of this?
by the grace of God.
Thank you for saying this.
That's the truth. It really is by the grace of God. So I'm just, I'm just a person, and I fail and I fall like everybody else. But I feel the heart. I feel that hand of God on me and my life, keeping me alive. And I just know this. I know that good is stronger than evil, and I know that light is what we need, light over dark. And I see a godless world developing around us, where people, encourage. There's the satanic symbolism that is rising in fashion and media and music and everything. It used to be there, but now it's just our children are drowning in this. And then you see an attack on creation in every form. The attack on climate is an attack on creation. The attack on the food supply, an attack on creation. When they literally tell you that CO2, the gas that we produce and that is vital to life on Earth, is a poison and killing the Earth, we're just in a bad place. When they take children and they mutilate their bodies medically and they destroy them for life before they have a chance to know who they are, this is just evil, Father. And so I am a warrior because God asked us all to fight. We have to be compassionate always, but you have to stand for something. And I stand for him, and I stand for these children, and I stand for good. And I just do my best. But there's a lot of days where I don't feel like I do very well at all. So I'm
No,
just like everybody else.
you do. You are in our prayers. Lara Logan, I'm going to call you the lioness of journalism in America and in the world, a defender of the freedom and a defender for the vulnerable, the sick, the people who have been abused repeatedly, the persecuted, the unjustly treated. And you are an advocate for peace. You are an advocate for truth. We love you so much. I bless you on this feast day of Saints Peter and Paul, to you, to Joe, to your family, to your team, to Luke, and to your beautiful podcast that you do. And may God bless us all, protect us from all evil, forgive us our sins, and bring us all to the victory, the truth, and the life, and the joy, and the peace of Jesus Christ, and to everlasting life. Amen.
In Jesus' name, amen. Please support the persecuted Christians and innocents caught up in the violence of wars in the Middle East, in Africa, and beyond. Go to Mission of Hope and Mercy, that's missionofhopeandmercy.org, to donate, or use this QR code on your screen to support our Give, Send, Go Great Hope 2025 fundraising campaign at givesendgo.com/Great Hope 2025. Whatever amount you can donate, no matter how big or small, it will be greatly appreciated by all of us. May God bless you for your great generosity, love of thy neighbor, and for your time.